Anime North, they always premiere this new movie there, which is the big movie that's been licensed by one of the larger anime licensing companies, Funimation, whatnot. And this year it happened to be Sword of the Stranger. Last year it was Vexil, which was not good. But this year it was Sword of the Stranger, which the story is basically, at the very start, it shows a small boy who is just being orphaned, running away from a burning village. And then immediately after, there is a samurai who calls himself Nameless, wandering the countryside. The two meet up under fortuitous circumstances to both, because the boy is being hunted by the Chinese, which have wandered in Japan for an unknown reason. Chinese squad of warriors. To be honest, there's really not much of a story here. That is the story. They keep alluding to some large flashback for the main character, Nameless. Yeah, real interest, real imagination putting up that name, eh? And they keep alluding to this flashback, what's happened to him before. You know what? It's really not all that traumatic when they actually do show it. It's not even really played up, so I'm not even sure why they included it at all, because it never seems to come into play at one point in the movie. You know, it just seems completely arbitrary to keep you watching the movie. And you know what, I can almost see that, because there's parts of the movie where I was just freaking bored, where absolutely nothing was happening. And don't get me wrong, I like depressing movies. This is by no means depressing, but I make the comparison because the palette for this movie is largely browns and yellows and washed out blacks, and that's almost for the entire movie. And you know, it gets really freaking boring near the end, or near, I guess, an hour in, where you're thinking to yourself, is there anything else going to happen in this movie? Because sure, you know what, I will give it this. The animation is very good. While I don't particularly think it's up to snuff with some other movies, you can clearly tell this is an animated movie. It does have a lot of money put into it. The fight scenes in particular look fantastic. There is no problem keeping up with them, and they are all bone-crushingly good. In many cases, often quite literally so. And it's all very entertaining to watch when it gets to those. However, the story bits kind of falter. The kid and his dog, Tobimaru, who may I say is the best anime dog since Ein from Cowboy Bebop, are fairly interesting, and so is Nameless, but they don't really stand out from anything else. This is your typical samurai movie, just animated. I mean, outside of the last half an hour, which I'll get to in a second, this is exactly what you'd find in any other anime or samurai movie ever made. Now, I can understand why they necessarily chose this. I've been seeing tons of great reviews for this, saying, oh, you know, it's a real action blockbuster movie. And yes and no. Yes, the action is really, really entertaining. And speaking of the last half hour almost makes up for the rest of the movie, because it is just one long action scene. It's a siege, it's one-on-one fights. The climax is very, very entertaining. But the majority of the movie seems to have a build-up, but not to the climax. And this goes along with the flashback. It doesn't seem like anything is connected, despite it being a non-episodic story. I mean, the Nameless and the kid meet up with Tobimaru and the dog. You know, someone gets poisoned, won't say who, gotta find the medicine, whatnot. It just seems like they're making it up as they go along. It doesn't seem like any of it was actually planned, which is a problem, to me at least. However, I will say, I know I've been kind of going over this haphazardly, but the characters are entertaining, they are somewhat likable, and the main villains, despite being almost completely devoid of any kind of characterization outside of the main villain, are fun to watch. If nothing else, because they're just so freaking crazy. And like many other animated movies, they kind of have these, or the main characters kind of have these pseudo-superpowered-esque moves, which doesn't make any fucking sense. But you know what? It does make the action much more interesting. Now, should you watch this movie? The story is not all that great. It's pretty generic. The characters, same deal. The animation, great, but not astounding. And the sound design, actually quite good, I will admit. But should you watch this movie? I would say if you're bored and you think this movie will interest you, you love samurai movies, go watch it. I'm not a samurai person myself, so that may explain somewhat of my distaste for the movie. But if you're really into samurai and anime, then you know what, you're probably going to like this, I gotta say. If you can look past the fact that understand that it's not going to be deep, it's just going to be a surface-level action movie with samurai, then you're probably going to enjoy this. For everyone else, you could probably skip it. Now, if you're bored one night, you could give it a watch. It's not entirely unentertaining, it's just kind of bland. Now, I do want to point out again, I feel like I'm being too down on this movie, but you know, I think this is about the apt grade that it deserves. But otherwise, outside of the last half hour, this movie was only okay. With the inclusion of the last half hour, I would say you probably give it a watch if you're bored, even if you don't really love samurai like I do. It's worth watching, but you don't really need to seek it out, and I don't think it's worth buying unless you're already a fan of it.